if you were never an athlete, what would you be doing now? Definitely a doctor. A tall doctor, but nonetheless, a doctor.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by SeatGeek. Download the mobile app for the easiest way to buy tickets and use the promo code LOFantasy to get you a $20 rebate on your first purchase. My name is Josh Lloyd, and you can always find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. And we're here to do another of the team preview podcasts. And this one, we're going to be doing a team. I think there's quite a bit of interest in this team. There's a lot of interest in all the teams, but this is one of the more intriguing teams in the NBA for this coming season. And of course, I'm talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves. And to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves and everything that's coming up for them this in this upcoming season, I'm joined by the host of the Locked On Wolves podcast and the Timberwolves radio play-by-play announcer, Alan Horton. Alan, how are you?
I'm good, Josh. How you doing?
I'm very good. Now you're in Minnesota. You've been covering this team for a while. There's an extraordinary amount of excitement for this young squad with a new coach, with franchise players perhaps on the team. A pretty exciting time to be in Minnesota.
Yeah, it is, and this will be my 10th year calling Wolves games on the radio, and this is really the first time that there's been this level of excitement entering a season. And it's easy to see why when you bring in the top free agent coach to go along with the last two Rookie of the Years in Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. You've got the two-time dunk champ Zach LaVine, who's trying to prove that he's more than just a dunker in this game. And you got a lot of other interesting pieces here with Shabazz Muhammad and Gorgui Dieng. You've got Ricky Rubio. You've just got a lot of things, a lot of group of these players. The motto here is the young core, this young talented core, and they absolutely are. And we'll see if they're ready to take the next step this year.
Yeah, it's going to be. Look, they're going to be one of the top teams that people watch. We've seen they're scheduled for a Christmas Day game. They're going to be a team that everyone's going to want to watch on League Pass, but everyone's going to want to hear about them, especially for fantasy. There's so much interest in the players on this team. So
let's get to it.
Let's get to these questions. We're going to kick off the show with Alan. We asked these questions to myself and our two other analysts over at Basketball Monster, Matt and Kyle. We've written one question for each team each, as that equals 3 questions, and then I turn those 3 questions and turn it onto the guest expert that I have on the podcast about these teams. So you're the Wolves guy, so let's talk about the Wolves here. The first one is about the guy that I think most people are going to want to know about, and that's karl-Anthony Towns. He had one of the best rookie seasons that we've seen really in recent memory. He's got a chance to become a top 5 fantasy player this season. It might be a little premature. He was a guy that was outside the top 10 last year, but where does he take his game this year? How does he expand on what he did last year that will enable him to take that second year leap? Because there is still a little bit of a risk that maybe he plateaus a little bit, but everything we've seen from Towns so far would have to indicate that he's almost a generational type talent.
Yeah, I think he's already shown, Josh, that he's just, his skill is very unique for someone who's a 7-footer, and he can take you inside, he can take you outside. Fantasy-wise, he gets you points, he gets you rebound, he gets you block shots. He's a double-double machine. And, let's put into perspective his statistics from last year. He shot the ball extremely well, up over 50%. He was one of the best mid-range shooters and long twos shooters in the game last year, which is amazing for a rookie to come in. And it wasn't just a handful of opportunities out there. We're talking a significant number of shots from those ranges. So he's already shown an outside touch for a big man that very few big men have. I mean, I think he's actually surpassed Anthony Davis in that category with his long shooting, certainly the threes, but also that mid-range game as well. But he put up all those numbers with really only playing about 30, 31 minutes a night. The Wolves really brought him along slowly. They didn't want to throw too much at him. They wanted to make him earn his playing time. And that may have come at the detriment of some wins last year. I'm not sure it would have made much difference, but there were some games where he got off to tremendous starts, and then he would sit for a good 8 or 9 straight minutes right after that first stint, and you're left wondering, why sit him so long? Give him a 4-minute, 5-minute stretch, get him right back out there. He's having one of those nights. Well, I think if he has those type of nights this year, I think with Tom Thibodeau, you're talking about a coach. Let's face it. One of the knocks on him was that he did play his starters too much, and the minutes started to add up for guys like Luol Deng and Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose. But he's going to play his best players significant minutes. So now, if we extrapolate out to Towns playing maybe, who knows, 34, 35, 36 minutes a night, if he can hold up at the defensive end and do everything Tibbs, I think that'll be the key this year. People are going to get some big time playing time if they can adhere to Tibbs' defensive principles. And if Karl's able to do that, he's going to be on the floor an awful lot, which means he's going to be putting up some big time numbers.
That's exactly what everyone in fantasy wants to hear. We know that Thibodeau ran these guys into the ground. Like Luol Deng almost died basically when he was playing in Chicago, and I say that as a joke, but he almost did die. But that's not necessarily to do with Thibodeau's playing, but he played. He led the league in minutes for 2-3 years in a row. Jimmy Butler led the league in minutes. Towns has got a real chance to, and Andrew Wiggins especially is going to be a guy who's right up there in leading the league in minutes this season, I'd say. But Towns is going to be a player who at some point in his career, he's going to be a positive contributor in every single fantasy category. He's already a points and rebounds guy. He's already a blocks guy. There's a real chance, Alan, that when we look at Towns, because one of the best things about his game, you talked about his mid-range shooting, but his passing is sensational. And we've seen Joakim Noah under Thibodeau average a ton of assists. Towns could get to 5 assists at some point in his career. That's not a crazy number to think of, is it?
No, it's not. You're exactly right. That was the one thing I didn't touch on that I was just about to touch on, is his passing ability. And you're right. I mean, how many times can you picture Noah getting the ball in the high post and distributing to cutters along the baseline or from the wings? Towns can do that exact same thing. He's got guard-like skills in a big man's body, and that includes being able to pass the rock. And when the offense gets humming, really like it did the last half of the season after the All-Star break, the Wolves offense, when they finally got Zach LaVine to the shooting guard spot, their offense ranked extremely well. You had Rubio, LaVine, Wiggins, Jang, and Towns. And, for lineups in the NBA that played over 200 minutes, there were 53 of them that played 200 or more minutes. The Timberwolves offense had 114 offensive rating. That ranked 4th out of those 53 lineups. So you're talking about efficiently running an offense at an elite level. Now, that same 5 really struggled defensively. They gave up 110 on their defensive rating, which ranked 48th out of those 53. So it gives you an idea of how imbalanced that lineup was last year, which was a little concerning because you had a guy like Ricky Rubio, who I think is a plus defender. Andrew Wiggins, certainly, he may not have proven it so far in the NBA, but coming into the league, he was supposed to be a plus defender. Karl-Anthony Towns anchoring the middle, protecting the rim, should be a plus defender. Gorky Jang, okay, should be a pretty good defender. That should have been a better defensive unit, and that's where this team is going to change under Tom Thibodeau. His defensive philosophy will come in and change that. His record speaks for itself. It's incredible the amount of success not only he had in Chicago, but in his assistant days with Boston and Houston and New York. His teams have been in the top 10 in the defensive ratings in 16 of his last 19 seasons. I mean, that's just an incredible statistic. I mean, while the Wolves have been, they've been in the bottom 5 of defensive rating in 6 of the last 9 years. So this is a sorely needed match made in heaven.
There's a lot to digest with what's happening with this team coming up. In terms of the second half of last year, so many guys really increased their ability to shoot. Like LaVine was hitting over 45% of his threes. Rubio's three-point percentage went through the roof. Wiggins starting hitting threes at over 40%. Towns is another guy who can hit threes also. So there's a lot that came together with this team. It was clearly their best 5 players, and they played a lot more minutes, and it looked a lot better. But the defense is a concern. And that's a concern heading into this season for fantasy as well. Not because Thibodeau doesn't know how to coach defense, because he does, but for players who may not adhere to what he wants to do defensively, that could cause a problem with them moving forward. And the main guy that I look at as being a concern there is potentially LaVine, who has been, if we're going to be honest, he's been really, really terrible as a defender for big stretches of his 2 years. And the concern there is that if he could come in and be under Tom Thibodeau and Tibbs goes, we're going to teach you, and LaVine picks it up quickly. Or he could come in and be terrible, and Tibbs teaches him and it doesn't work, and he goes, this is just not working. Let's get Chris Dunn in to play some more minutes. Let's move Wiggins to the 2 because
Yeah.
Levine's only going to be able to play 27 minutes a night. Otherwise, we're going to get roasted. So that is a legitimate concern with Levine, isn't it?
It's a big risk if you're in a fantasy draft and Zach LaVine's right there on the board because you're absolutely right. I think he's a guy that could play if he does figure it out defensively. He could play 35, 36 minutes a night and put up some big numbers. But you're right. If he doesn't grasp it, he's not going to be playing, and then you're left with the guy who's just going to come off the bench and play a really limited role. So it's either feast or famine for Zach. And they finally got him in the right position last year after a year and a half at the point guard spot, which is just an absolute disaster. Although it did help them acquire the last 2 number 1 picks. In the 27 starts he had, in the second half of the season, I mean, he put up really solid numbers. You mentioned it, 45% from 3, 48% from the field, 17 points a game. He can make it look easy when he's not saddled with having to run the point. But that'll be the big question, is whether or not he can adhere to Tibbs's defense. The one thing that probably works a little bit in his favor is the fact that the Wolves aren't particularly deep at that shooting guard spot. You mentioned Chris Dunn. I think the Wolves do have some things to sort out there at that point guard spot. Ricky averages about 32 minutes a game over his career. He is best when he's playing long stretches, and if he, as we've talked about, Tibbs likes to play his guys a lot of minutes, and I think Ricky Rubio is going to be a Tibbs guy, and so I expect him to be playing a lot of minutes. So that means that if Chris Dunn's going to get playing time, some of it is going to have to come with Rubio at the point, and those two playing together in the backcourt. But after that, you don't really have a whole lot of options. I mean, Brandon Rush is a guy who can shoot the 3 a little bit and has had to roll off the bench the last 2 years with Golden State, but I don't think he's going to come in here and all of a sudden play 30 minutes a night. So I think Zach has that working in his favor, is that the Wolves aren't particularly deep at that spot.
Yeah, what you said about and Rush shot 40%, I believe, from 3 last season, but he's also had seasons where he's been a really poor 3-point shooter. So there isn't a huge amount of depth behind Levine, but you're right, he could play a stack of minutes or he could be really limited to a bench role. So that pushes him down draft boards because he could be a top 50 guy if we know that he is going to get 35 minutes. Then you're going to get potentially 20 points. He'll get 2.5 threes. He'll give you 3.5 assists. He'll get a steal and a bit. He'll shoot really nice percentages. So there's a lot to there's a lot to like, but he's not without risk. But he's only 21 years of age. Maybe he picks it up. It's not like he's had the greatest stability so far in his 2 years in the league. There's obviously the Flip Saunders issue. There's the Sam Mitchell, whatever that was that he was doing last season. There was and playing at a position for a year and a half. So maybe now that he's in his actual position that makes sense for him offensively, that can work for him defensively as well. So he's not, because I imagine him going down there, playing point guard for a year and a half, not knowing what he's doing, honestly, and making mistakes, and then it's on his mind as he turns the ball over. He has to run back down and go, "Oh, I did it again! Like, what am I doing? I was in the wrong spot. Why can't I grasp this?" And that's playing on your mind when you play both ends. But he's in a more comfortable position. Then you'd think that he can do what he does offensively without having to think, without having to be as concerned about not doing the right thing. And then maybe more attention goes there, plus better coaching. So if I'm putting faith in him doing it, but it's not without risk. So that's something that you do have to pay attention to when you're looking at Levine there, because really, really good numbers, but not locked into playing 35 minutes a night. And everyone thinks that Thibodeau's going to play everyone 35 minutes a night that comes in, and that's just he does with some people, but he just doesn't do it with everybody. So you have to be aware of that.
There was one thing about Zach you could see last year when he was at the point. His body language and you could see him thinking when he's playing the point guard spot. And when he moved to that shooting guard spot, he just looked more at ease. His body language was better. He was just kind of more loosey-goosey, and we saw the results from that. It just freed him up. I mean, it was so noticeable. It was really incredible. So, I kind of, if I'm going to favor one side or the other, I'm going to believe in Zach. I love his athletic ability. Obviously, he's one of the most athletic players in the league. So if I'm going to lean one way, I'm tending to lean in favor of Zach kind of figuring things out and be able to do enough defensively to stay on the floor.
Excellent!
Thibodeau's coming in, and he's got that reputation for playing guys a lot of minutes. But the other reputation that he has that some people may not be aware of is the fact that his teams play really slow. And I think he's in the bottom third of pace every year that he was a head coach in Chicago. But the team's a little bit different. He's not running Carlos Boozer. And Derrick Rose is a quick player, but he's not a fast player. Like he moves fast, but he doesn't necessarily move the ball fast. With the way that Thibodeau went on his nationwide tour of sitting in on practices and listening to coaches last season, and the way that the NBA has trended their pace upwards, do you think that Tibbs is going to be able to introduce a non-glacial speeded offense this season, or do you think he'll just sit in that bottom third where he's been comfortable throughout his career?
Well, I certainly hope they increase the pace a little bit from his Chicago days. I do think you're right. I think you've got different personnel than he had in his Chicago days. I think overall maybe a little bit younger as well. You compare Towns to Noah, and you've got someone I think who can run the floor a little bit better. And of course Zach LaVine speeding out on the wings, and you want to put your people in a position. He said this when he was hired, that you want to put your people in a position to succeed. And where Ricky Rubio's at his best is when he's got the ball in his hands and he's pushing the pace. And, he can see the floor better than most people out there. And you want to put him in a position to succeed, and that's where he's at his best. This is 6 years now for Ricky, and everybody talks about his shooting and his lack of being able to hit a three or an outside jumper, but he still brings. He's so good in so many other areas that I think people overlook. But I would try to make the most. This is probably the most talent he's had. That 13-14 season, he had Kevin Love and he had Pekovic healthy and he had Kevin Martin. But I think this is a little bit more of a dynamic roster around him. And as he gets more and more comfortable playing with Wiggins and Towns and LaVine, I think you've got to increase the pace a little bit. I think it sounds like Tibbs is sort of. I think he learned something from his time in Chicago, and whether it was, a year off helps you reflect. And I think his tour of the camps of other teams, I think that kind of, just he's a basketball junkie. And I think he's always learned from wherever he's gone and whatever he's experienced. And so I would again lend towards the fact that, he's got this roster that needs to get out and run once in a while. And I think they will.
I'm glad you brought up Rubio. We'll transition into talking about him now. You can't see it, Alan, but behind me I do have a Ricky Rubio jersey hanging. He's one of my favorite players.
Nice.
He's one of
Is
my
it a
favorite
Wolves
players.
one, or is it back in his Spanish days?
No, it's a Wolves one. I've got a stack of jerseys behind. I've got a Towns one and I've got a Rubio one hanging behind me at the moment. But Rubio's one of my favorite players. I go on plenty of rants on this podcast about Rubio over the last few years, and I've been especially cognizant of talking about him this offseason because of the Wolves drafting Chris Dunn. Now, lots of people are out there saying, Rubio's gone. Yeah, Dunn's going to come in and be the starting point guard. Rubio's trash. He's terrible. And that bothers me a lot because there's a couple of things for that. So I'm going to make this a Rubio-Dunn discussion, I think. Tibbs doesn't play rookies. Yeah, he's never had a pick 5 as a rookie, but he just doesn't play them. Jimmy Butler played about 8 minutes a game. Yes, Tony Snell was 15. Doug McDermott played 8 minutes. Marcus Teague, he was terrible, but he didn't play either. None of these guys played, but they weren't the number 5 pick. So I've given a little bit of leeway to Dunn and think that he'll get maybe 20 minutes. But when they come into camp, and people who listen to this podcast all the time would have heard me say this a million times, but I want to say it to you, Alan. Tibbs is not going to come in and look at Rubio and look at Dunn and go, oh, cool. The guy that's been in the league, who's only 2 years older than Dunn, that's been doing it for 7 years, it's a top 3 passer and a top 3 defender at his position. Let's forget about that and give it to the guy who equally can't shoot and has never done it before. It beggars belief that he would come in and do that, especially when he sees Rubio, and people, again, there's the misconception that he's European, therefore he can't defend. He's one of the best defensive point guards in the league. He's one of the best passers in the league. I said top 3 in both of those categories. He could easily lead the league in assists and steals this season. He's going to be a Tibbs favorite. Dunn will play, but there is in no world that he is a better player than Rubio, unless people are basing it off 2 summer league performances, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm glad that you're on board.
It's way, 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 way too soon. Way too soon. I tell you what, Josh, I was in Target Center hosting a show that night when the NBA draft happened, and as you could see it play out, and you could see Chris Dunn falling to the Timberwolves, I was excited to get him, but on the other hand, I was equally just, oh boy, here comes the Ricky Rubio trade talk. Here comes slot him right into the starting point guard spot, and there goes Ricky, and just, it unfortunately, statistics are, some of them just stick into people's mind, and the shooting thing is just, it has been a bugaboo for, obviously he hasn't been able to hit his shot like he needs to, but That's something that has just stuck out like a sore thumb above everything else that he does. And you touched on it. I mean, it's just, and being around him the last 5 years, there's a great quality about him. He's a winner. He is all about the team first. That's why he absolutely loves going back and playing with the Spanish national team. It's a brotherhood. Those guys are so tight. And that's something he talked about when he first came here. He's like, I want to have that feeling with an NBA team. And now it's a little bit different because of free agency and guys coming in and coming out every year. But he hasn't been able to have that with this organization. I think that's something he desperately wants to have. And I watch a lot of international soccer too, and I've always been a big Barcelona fan for the way they play with Messi and Iniesta and all these guys, Xavi Alonso, and Ricky he plays the game like Barcelona plays soccer. He sees the floor just like those guys see the soccer field and are able to pass like no other team. At least in the previous few years, maybe not so much now, but I'm just a huge fan of Ricky. I love his attitude and I love his work ethic. And unfortunately, he was coming off the ankle injury 2 summers ago. This summer he plays for Spain. He loses his mother, who died of cancer this summer, so he's coming off of that. He hasn't been able to dedicate a full off season to his jumper in 3 or 4 years. And he had the knee injury his rookie year that kicked out his first summer, but he's just never had that time. I mean, we had a shooting coach in Mike Penberthy who was hired almost specifically for Ricky, and Mike's another good guy, and those guys got along extremely well. But they just, Mike would say, you just can't fix things in a session or two or a week or two. It's got to be day after day, week after week, month after month for a good 3 month session in the off season or something around that length. And Ricky has just not been able to have that time to do it. And so I fear that his shot will continue to struggle. And especially and Ricky, he knows it. He knows it. And I think too often he tries to force the issue of, well, I know they're going under it on the screen. I have to make them pay. I've got to pull up for this mid-range jumper. And he took over 200 last year and shot 35%. I mean, that's not an efficient shot. And unfortunately, the Wolves had a lot of guys who shot poorly from the mid-range. I looked this up today. I couldn't believe it. The Wolves have 3 of the worst 9 shooters from the mid-range this past year, and that was with more than 200 shot attempts from that area. Now, fortunately, Karl-Anthony Towns was balancing things out at the other end. He finished about 5th in the league at 48%, but Zach LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, and Ricky Rubio just all shot 35% or less from the mid-range, and the Wolves led the league in mid-range shots. And I think that's one thing that Tibbs will change. I mean, when he came into Chicago, the Bulls were in that same scenario. Under Vinny Del Negro, they were shooting a ton of mid-range shots, and he got them to kind of balance things out and switch some of those twos to threes. And I think he'll do the same thing in Minnesota.
What Rubio did last season is that after the All-Star break, he shot 40% from the field. He shot 37% from three. Now, they're not great numbers, but they are when you compare it to what he did previously. And who's another point guard who didn't really hit 40% of his shots until last season? That's Kemba Walker. But people don't put those guys in the same boat. And Walker was a guy that took double the amount of shots of what Rubio does. He only took 7.7 field goal attempts per game last year. So that's right. In a fantasy situation, 37% isn't good. But on such limited attempts, you can overcome it. Now, it's best if you're punting that category, and then his value rises up significantly because you're going to get so many assists and so many steals. And he's a really good rebounder, and he still does get you some threes, and he gets to the line a decent amount. He got to the line over half. He had a free throw rate of over 50%, which is not a common thing, and he hits them at a high percentage as well. So he helps you in that category too. So I really, really like Rubio. He's a guy that you can get in the 4th or 5th round in fantasy drafts who, to me, has 2nd or 3rd round value, especially if you're not considering the field goal percentage. But even then, the attempts are so low that it doesn't really impact you a huge amount. And he's shown the propensity to increase it in that second half of the season as the offense became better, as the other guys around him spaced out a little bit more as well. And you mentioned going under on screens. You can go under on screens with some people, but you can do it with him as well, don't get me wrong, but his vision enables him to be able to see passes and execute passes if they do go under screens too aggressively, because he can thread the needle through three guys, whereas other people can't see that or don't have that same sort of vision. So it is something that it doesn't necessarily force him into a shot every time. Otherwise, he'd be taking more than 8 shots a game. So it doesn't completely write it off. And the Dunn thing doesn't really. I'm more concerned about Dunn taking Levine's minutes than I am about Rubio's minutes this season, as we already talked about. Now let's talk a little bit more about Chris Dunn, who comes in. What sort of role do you think he plays? Is he a guy that might get 25 minutes a night? Does he play 20 minutes a night? How do you see him fitting into the rotation this season?
Yeah, that's really interesting to me because as I mentioned, Rubio, his career average is 32 minutes a game, and I really think Ricky's got to play minutes to be effective. That's when he's at his best. And so we kind of think, okay, what's Tibbs going to do? Maybe up to 35 minutes for Ricky. Well, that would only leave 13 minutes at the point guard for the likes of Chris Dunn, and that's that seems really low for a top 5 pick. And I think Chris, the way, even though he only played 2 summer league games and he suffered a concussion and then was out for the rest of the summer league, he was really impressive in those 2 games. My first impression was that he already looks like he belongs in the NBA. I mean, especially having seen guys like Wiggins and Levine come into the league and play for the Timberwolves, they're growing into their bodies. It takes 2, 3, 4 years to grow into their bodies. Dunn matched up against Emmanuel Mudiay, and he looked just as big as Mudiay, and Mudiay is a pretty big guy. And not only did Dunn kind of hold his own and average 24 points and 7 rebounds and 3 assists and 2 steals, shot 54%. Yes, it's summer league, but I think those were still very positive signs. So he's got that NBA body, and I just love the fact that I think he's going to get playing time because of the way he can defend, the way he gets after it, and the way I think he probably already has a connection to Tom Thibodeau a little bit, being from let's see, Thibodeau is from, I got to get these straight. They're both from Connecticut, New London and New Britain, I think. Chris Dunn is from New London, and they're only about an hour away up the 95. So they know some of the same people. I asked Thibodeau about that this summer, and he says, yep, I knew a couple of his coaches. I talked to some people. And so I really think that he's going to fit in well with what Thibodeau wants to do. So I think that means that Rubio and Dunn are going to play together. And Summer League being what it is, you saw Dunn play with Jones a whole lot at the 1 and 2, and they kind of shifted off on the point guard spot. I think offensively, yes, that backcourt might struggle to find some outside shooting, at least initially. But I think what matters when you're looking at lineups, or what matters most, is how you match up defensively. And I think Dunn and Rubio are both, I think Rubio's already proven, as you've talked about, he's a plus defender, and I think Dunn can be as well. I mean, there's both 6'4" guys that have 6'8", 6'9" wingspan. I think that's one thing that teams, I see it almost every game, Josh. It's incredible. Teams underestimate Ricky's length. And they think they can make this pass on the perimeter, and Ricky just sticks out his paw and he deflects it or picks it off, and he's going back the other way. And I think Dunn is the same way, and Dunn's got a toughness to him that I think that could be a pretty dynamic backcourt. Again, they might struggle offensively, but the way they might get after it defensively. I think another thing about Rubio too is something I started keeping track of a couple of years ago is offensive fouls drawn, and Ricky continually is up there in the top 10. Last year finished second to Ersan Ilyasova in drawing offensive fouls, and it's something that is just it doesn't kind of fit in the box score. It's as good as a steal. Although it's not a live ball turnover, it's the next best thing. So I think if you got 2 guys that can defend like that on the perimeter, which and I mentioned the size, so they could both switch off on most backcourts in the NBA. So I think Tibbs is going to have some choices there about lineups he wants to go to.
You mentioned about Thibodeau and Dunn. I'd be shocked if Tibbs didn't know every single basketball coach in all of America, because it basically
that's true, isn't it?
I feel like he has no other life or interest. And have you, Alan, you've probably seen it, but whenever you see a picture of Thibodeau in like jeans and a t-shirt, he just looks so weird. He just looks really uncomfortable. Like he just needs to be in a suit on a sideline, and that's all. I imagine he goes home, and very similar to people who might have seen How I Met Your Mother, with it when Barney goes and sleeps in the suit pajamas. I imagine that's what Thibodeau does. He goes home and everything he wears is just like a suit, because he just looks so like out of place and uncomfortable if he's doing something that's not basketball related.
Yeah,
Um,
he's just a guy that I think early on decided, you know what, this is going to be my path in life, and I need to dedicate everything I've got. If I want to be the best, I've got to dedicate everything I've got to making that happen. And he is, he's never been married and doesn't have a family. I mean, he's got some brothers and sisters and stuff like that, but it's he is all basketball all the time, and of course he's with Team USA, so he had a year off. I asked him, I said, hey, you ready for this off season? You've got the draft coming up, you've got free agency, you've got Team USA, you've got training camp. He said, I rested last year. He just left it right at that.
I imagine he'd be sitting at home watching games and calling plays while he was watching on TV just to keep himself
Yeah,
in the mode for it. And Dunn, we talked about Dunn being NBA ready. He's older than Wiggins. He's older than Towns. He's older than Levine.
I know. It's incredible.
He's older than all these guys. So it makes sense. And you mentioned about him matching up against Moutier. He's like 3 years older than what Moutier is. Like he comes in as a big guy, a strong player, and that's going to help his transition. But again, he's a fine guy for me to take in the last round of a draft in case something weird happens. But realistically, Levine and Rubio are going to have those two spots sort of on lockdown, and then he slots in, and I think that he takes more shooting guard minutes than point guard minutes. We'll see how it all works out, but he does have a very nice fantasy game. It's just a matter of him getting on the court this season, which it's a struggle for all rookies, and I think we're going to see that more this season than other seasons. Is that I think last year we had 18 rookies play over 20 minutes a night. I don't think we'll have it. I don't think we'll have it this season just because the level of rookies isn't quite the same as what we had last season. So you'll see a lot of even high picks struggle to get big minutes. Like guys like Jaylen Brown won't have a huge amount of minutes in Boston. Dunn's another one just because of the players in front of them, and you're just waiting their turn for that sort of role. So that's something we can we just don't anticipate rookie production that we saw last season, because last season in particular was one out of the box. When we get to next year, different story, but I wouldn't be expecting big things from these guys moving forward. Now, Alan, in free agency, not a huge free agency class for this team. We've talked about Brandon Rush already. He's down the list here behind Dunn probably at the 2. He will get some minutes, but he's not going to have much of an impact. The guy that I really want to focus on is another guy who's one of my favorites, and that's karl-Aldrich for this team. He was tremendous last season for the Clippers. Stepped in when DeAndre Jordan had to miss time and was excellent, really. And then even in backup minutes, he was a tremendous rim protector. He's efficient with his shooting from the line, from the field. Block shots, grabs rebounds, and the contract that the Wolves were able to get him on was an absolute steal to me. Now, we're going to talk about Gorgie Dieng in a little bit, but I think that with Aldrich coming across, there's a chance to me that Thibodeau plays some Towns-Aldrich lineups and pushes Towns out to the 4 a little bit, and that might have an impact on what Dieng can do, because I think that when Thibodeau gets his hands on what Cole can do, he's going to want to make sure he gets him on the court for around 20 minutes a night, because he can be impactful in that time. Did you like that signing?
I did. I like the fact that the Wolves did not go, and start becoming the LA Lakers, and spending 4 years and $72 million on guys, whether it was Timofey Mozgov or Luol Deng. I think they were smart about things. I think this year is going to be more about the roster that Thibodeau inhabits, and even though he's watched them on film, I think it's going to take. It'll take a season under real live action to see what he's got and to see what he wants to have going forward. And then I think the Wolves are also well positioned in free agency next year, because you're right, they didn't spend a ton of money on Cole Aldrich or Brandon Rush or Jordan Hill. Some teams have already kind of taken them. Not only will there be a bigger free agent crop next year, but some teams, a handful of teams have already taken themselves out of the running for some of those guys next year. So I think there's a better opportunity to have a better shot at a good player next season. The Wolves will have money to spend, and I think Tibbs will have a better idea. He and Scott Layden will know who it is they exactly want to go after at what spot. Cole Aldrich, in his 13 minutes a night last year with the Clippers, did extremely well and was high efficiency, and really is a nice addition, I think. I mean, if you just stick with the Towns, Dieng, and Aldrich sort of trio there, you've got a nice rotation and some guys that can do some different things. And I think the idea of moving Towns sometimes at the 5, sometimes to the 4, I think that's both of those can work. I think he can interchange between the two, and I think you're right. They're going to find some minutes for Cole Aldrich because he can be productive.
No love for Adrian Payne there.
Adrian Payne, I root for all the guys that come in, and AP's he's got ability, but you've seen this. I mean,
Yep.
it's not just with the Timberwolves. Guys that come into the league, they've got all the athletic ability in the world, but if you can't kind of figure it out upstairs and figure out what the coach wants and how you can fit in and how you can fit into a team concept, guys end up out of the league. We had another guy in here a bunch of years ago, Rashad McCants, who had great athletic ability, but could never figure it out. And that first game of the summer league when I saw Adrian Payne, we saw him so sporadically last year, and he wasn't able to string many good performances together. And then that first summer league game, he played, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes, and I've just it was all of those things combined into one 30-minute game, and I was just, oh my goodness. But he did play better the rest of that summer league. But Adrian Payne's going to have a good camp, because even though he's got a guaranteed deal, there's going to be a bunch of guys that they bring into camp, and with some salary cap available, Thibodeau and Layden could easily cut one of the guaranteed guys and bring on somebody else if they think that's a better fit.
Back to Aldridge for a sec. After the All-Star break last season, if we look at fantasy value and extrapolate everyone out to per 36 minutes, he was the fifth best player over that stretch, because he only played 15 minutes a game, but he grabbed 6
Right.
rebounds and he had a steal and he had 1.6 blocks, but he shot 67% from the field and he shot 84% from the line, and those two combinations, it just doesn't happen. Like, people just don't shoot those high percentages. Now, you'll go onto Basketball Monster and you'll see that he's ranked around number 100, and people go, what are you talking about, Cole Aldridge, 19 minutes, you guys are crazy. Well, I'm not crazy, because that efficiency is really good, but what he does is he blocks shots in huge amounts. In his career, he has had 3 seasons where he's blocked over 3 shots per 36 minutes, which is a really big amount. He was at 3.1 last year, 3.3 2 years ago, and 3.3 in his second season. So he's going to get big amount of blocks. I think he gets an increase from the 13 minutes he played last season. I'm sure he gets an increase in the minutes there. And he's going to be a guy that can get you over 1.5 blocks in 20 minutes a night, and get you 7 rebounds, and get you a steal, and shoot really high percentages. He's not going to score much, but for what you need at the end of a draft, and you don't have to pick him inside the top 100, grab him with your last pick, and you're going to get those numbers. So don't be thrown off by the fact that, he's only going to play 18 minutes, or he's only a backup, but he gets stuff done in short amount of times, and he's super efficient. And then if someone goes down and he's forced into bigger minutes, we're talking a top 50 type of player, and a guy that you can really make a lot of money off in DFS situations, because he does everything really well. Like, he's just really efficient in what he does, and he just gets stuff done, and that's basically my thoughts on him. Now, Jordan Hill is there as well. I'm not sure about Jordan Hill. I'm not the greatest fan of what he can do. He's had a few opportunities. He had a massive opportunity with the Lakers a couple of seasons ago, but never has been able to get his fitness right up. Where does he fit in? Is he more of an insurance if Garnett doesn't play at all, and if Pekovic doesn't play?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you have to go into camp expecting that Pekovic and Garnett are not going to give you. Well, maybe let's start with Pekovic, but you have to go in hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. And the foot injuries that Peck has suffered. He's just such a big man, and boy, I wish I was just thinking about this the other day. The days that just a few years ago when he was the big bruiser battling his way down the floor, and just you thought he's such a unique sized guy in the NBA, which has gone to such a smaller kind of league and perimeter oriented, but Peck was just a beast. And I miss those days. I miss watching Peck go to work down low. And he's been working out, but we'll find out more in a couple weeks here when training camp starts. But you have to go in expecting not to get a single minute from him this year. And if you do get something, then great. But you have to prepare for the worst. Kevin Garnett might be the same type of thing. He was MIA since January. So I think Hill is there, as a backup, as in case those two guys can't play. And if you do have a lot of people there, and you've got Nemanja Bjelica there at the 4, who, but I really like Bjelica. I just like his skill set at that position, and we saw flashes of it last year, but he could not find a consistency to his game. He got hurt last year, and when I think of Tibbs, I think of and the possible relationship with Bjelica. I think kind of Nikola Mirotic and his days in Chicago, and just that wasn't a huge hit right away, and it took time, and so it'll be interesting to me to see where Nemanja Bjelica fits in there. And then you've got Adrian Payne, who I think really has to he's got to show signs in the training camp that he can figure things out defensively and um, not be a liability at that end. So Jordan Hill probably fits in. Who knows? It's probably him and Bielitsa battling for that second big off the bench, I would imagine.
I think the Bielitsa would get that role over him. But you're right, he had a lot of consistency issues last season. He was sort of all over the place. Started off really strong and hit a ton of shots, then hurt his knee and was out for a month or so, but then never got it back until basically we headed into the end of March and April, and then he started to look like the player we saw at the start of the season. But he was sort of all over the place. But I think he's going to have a significant backup type role this season. His skill set is something really interesting as a four as well. A guy who can go out and hit the 3-pointer. He can do a little bit of passing. He's still got to work on his defense as well. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy that racks up tons of defensive numbers or defensive stats or block shots or anything like that. He's going to be one of those players who just hits some threes and does it fairly efficiently, and is just reliable at what he does on the offensive end. But again,
and he elected not to play for the Serbian national team this summer too. So he did not go to their qualifying tournament, and he did not join them in Rio either. So he really dedicated the offseason to getting himself in shape, focused, and wanting to impress his new boss. So I'm interested to see how he comes out and plays, because he's had a very focused offseason. I've seen him a bunch of times at the Timberwolves practice facility.
There's two guys in the starting five that we haven't mentioned yet. One of them, I don't think there's any concern over in terms of what his role is going to be, and that's Andrew Wiggins. He could, and I said it before, I think he could lead the league in minutes this season. I think he probably leads this team in minutes. He's already played a ton of minutes under Saunders and Mitchell the first two seasons. I think he goes up. He could easily be at 38, 39 minutes this season. He's young. That's the sort of player. It's exactly Jimmy Butler, Luol Deng. Let's get a guy on the wing who's athletic, who goes both ways, and let's just play him as much as we can. And we talked about depth at the two. There's less depth at the three. Like there's nobody here unless you're going to move Bielitsa down, but that's not great to play him at the three. Shabazz Muhammad's going to have as many concerns as Levine has in terms of his defensive ability, and he's nowhere near the offensive talent, or he is in certain areas, but he's not the same talent as Levine. So Wiggins is going to play a lot of minutes. Now, for the past two seasons, Wiggins has been tremendously overrated in fantasy because he's done one thing really well. He's scored, but he hasn't done anything else well really at all. But we saw at the end of last season, we saw his three-point shot coming around. We saw his efficiency creep up. Where does he take? It's a third season for him. Does he take a step forward in some of the other areas? Because we think he's going to lead the team in scoring, but he needs to get better in terms of his ball handling, his passing, his rebounding, his ability to generate steals, and really become a lockdown defender.
Yeah.
What makes you? Are you led to believe that he will be that guy this season? Because I do think that he's going to take a big step forward.
I think the first sign of that, Josh, was the fact that he didn't go play for Canada as they tried to qualify for the Olympics. And had he gone and played in that tournament in Manila, he probably helps Canada qualify, and then he's playing in Rio. But he did the same thing as Bielitsa, and Gorgui Dieng did the same thing, not playing for Senegal. These guys were, whether they chose or they were sort of told, hey, you need to maybe focus on your job here in the NBA rather than your overseas work. Who knows? But I think it's a great sign that he didn't go to play for Canada. Sorry about that, Team Canada. But you're right. It's just amazing that Wiggins, and I've watched every game the last 2 years, and just he can score. You're right, but the numbers elsewhere have been microscopic. I mean, his assists actually went down last year from 2.1 to 2. His rebounds went down by a rebound per game, and they were only at 4.6 to start. This is for a guy playing 36 a night. So he's got to be. There was one game late in the year in Oklahoma City where Ricky Rubio won it on a three, and Wiggins drove. And I don't know. There's probably only been a handful of times in 2 years that he's driven, hangs in the air, and kicks out. And he knew he was going to pass in that situation. And there just haven't been many times when he's done that. And he has got to get the assists up, the rebound. It's amazing he's on the floor so much and around the basket and can't grab a rebound. That has got to improve. And I think still there are times defensively where he has not maybe lived up to expectations, but I don't think those expectations are without reach. I think Tibbs will get to him defensively, and he can be that lockdown defender. I think that everybody thought he would be when he came out of Kansas.
he was a guy that was ranked outside the top 80 last year in fantasy. I think that he's got a real chance to be a top 40 sort of guy just by, even if he just gets that rebounding number back up to what he did as a rookie and just gets an extra half an assist, gets an extra 0.2, 0.3 steals. The efficiency was crazy at the end of the year. He hit threes. The minutes will go up. The scoring should go up. I think there's a real big season in store for Wiggins. And even if those other numbers don't necessarily come around, the fact that he might average 25 points a night, which is not a huge stretch for him, that's really, really good to anchor you in that category. So he's going to go early, but in every other year that he's gone early, I've just been like, just calm down. I don't think it's going to work. But I'm really on board with, I think I've taken him in drafts already at about pick 40. I'm really on board with him, potentially pushing to be a top 30 guy. Now, the other guy who is almost a guarantee for top 30 production if he gets the minutes, and that's Gorgie Jeng. Now, I've had people say this to me, Alan. They say, oh, Jeng, definite top 25 guy because we know he's going to have a more stable role this season. And I just say, look, let's just wait a minute because we don't know. We don't know what Thibodeau's going to do. To me, It makes sense that he's going to play Jeng biggish minutes, but we don't know what Thibodeau's going to do. Do you have any insight into how he might lean towards playing that Jeng Towns front court? Do you think Jeng plays? Because we saw how well they played together at the end of last season. But do you think Thibodeau has concerns with that pairing?
I think it's going to have to be a wait and see thing. I don't know that. I think like we've mentioned a number of times with some guys, whether it's whether it's Zach LaVine or someone else, it's how well they're able to function under Tibbs's defensive principles. And if that Jang Towns lineup can continue to do good things like it did last year, then I think Gorgie's an incredibly bright guy. I mean, here's a guy who comes from Senegal and doesn't speak a lick of English and goes to prep school for 3 years. Then he goes on to Louisville for 3 years. And, one thing that I think has really hurt Gorgie, I think he's progressed nicely, in his 3 years. But he's played for 3 different head coaches. And this will be and for a lot of the guys, their 4th head coach in the last 4 years. And there hasn't really been a consistency for Gorgie because his role has really changed from coming off the bench to then starting half the year 2 years ago, and then also starting half the games, last year, starting 39 games. So his role's kind of changed a little bit, and the philosophies have changed each and every year. I think he needs some consistency. He'll have that now with Thibodeau, who's locked in. And I think he just seems to me, I would, again, steer towards it working out for Gorgie. I think he's a hard worker. I think he can be a beast at the defensive end. And I think I would lean towards that working, and I think Gorgie will probably see some big minutes.
Look, we've got him currently projected at 30 minutes, and that's me being really conservative. I could easily see a situation where he plays 34, but even in 30 minutes, he's a top 40 player. So you get him to 34 minutes, and we're talking a guy that is literally flirting with the top 20 because he's going to get you over 1.5 blocks. He'll get you 1.5 steals. He'll get you 8 or 9 rebounds, 13 points. And like I talked about with Aldridge, he's a guy that's a 50 and 80 plus percentage guy from the field and from the line, and that is just ridiculously valuable. You're talking about in the range of a guy like Brook Lopez and LaMarcus Aldridge who go in that 2nd or 3rd round, and there's the bigs who shoot 50 and 80 plus. There's 5 maybe in the NBA, and one of them's Towns. Lopez, there's Aldridge, there's Cantor, there's Cole Aldrich as well, and that's probably it. There's not many bigs who can do that, and Jen can do it.
Good point.
Plus, he brings up the defensive numbers. Plus, he's a really good rebound. He had, I think, a 20 rebound game in his rookie season from memory, or maybe his second season. He pulls down some.
Yeah, I think he's had a couple of 20 rebound games, and he shot 23 pointers. I don't know if that's going to be something he continues to do, but he hit a couple of big threes in a game against Washington last year from the corners, and if he can be, if he might be able to get you a 3 once a week or something like that, so that. I know he shoots a lot of them with his Senegal team when he does play for his national team, but he started to hit a couple of those at the end of last year too.
I've been saying it for about 2 years. I think he can be a stretch 4, and people were saying, what gives you the idea that he can be a stretch? Well, the fact that he's got such a nice shooting stroke, that he hits his free throws at such a high rate, that he goes out, steps out and hits long twos, means I'm convinced that he's going to be a guy. And this might be the year in his 4th season where he steps out and he turns into Anthony Davis from out there, who hits almost 1 a game. DeMarcus Cousins did it last season. Al Horford did it last season. Guys, Luis Scola did it last season. Guys who have never done it before stepped out and went, okay, now we're confident in it. let's go and do it. And I can see that being what Gene can do this season. That's a real upside to his game. Maybe it drops his field goal percentage 1 or 2%, but adding half a three a game, which is really not crazy for what he can do, and it puts him and Towns as the 4 and 5, who both of them can pick and pop and can stretch out and basically hit shots from anywhere. It makes the offense a lot harder to defend. So I'm all aboard Jeng this season. There's a little bit of risk associated with it, but the upside is absolutely tremendous for him. Now, I touched on Shabazz Muhammad before. Where's his career at?
Well, Shabazz he'll be interesting to watch this year and see if he is a Tibbs guy or not. I give Shabazz a lot of credit. He's remade his body in every offseason, and he is an offensive-minded player, and he has been able to find his little niche in that left block and that little jump hook with his left hand from the block out to 13, 15 feet, and he's a tenacious offensive rebounder. That's been one of the more enjoyable things to watch. Is I love watching guys go after offensive rebounds, and Shabazz was oftentimes following up his own miss, but he really is just tenacious going for it. And at the other end of the floor, though, that's where the big issue is. I mean, if he can't improve in that area, then it's going to be, this may be his final season with the Timberwolves. But he's just. I want to root for Shabazz, but I'm not sure if he's got that defensive ability in him. I don't know. That's going to be the big question. And so he might be a guy that is completely out of the rotation. If he can't get it defensively, he's going to be out of the rotation. It's just that kind of 6-man spurt offensive production that he has given the Wolves the last couple of years. That doesn't seem to fit with Tibbs. It's always about defense first. So. Again, if he can't play that, then it's going to be trouble for Shabazz.
And some of his minutes in that role will probably go towards Dunn and Rush, I would say, to get some guys who can defend it at a higher level. But you talk about his inability to play on that end. I've mentioned somewhere, I think on the Rockets podcast, about Ryan Anderson, who averaged less combined assists, steals, and blocks, and he did 3-pointers. It was at like 1.6. Well, Shabazz Muhammad per 36 minutes averages only 1.7 combined assists, steals, and blocks, and that is painfully low. It is almost unfathomably low. It per 36 minutes to average less than 2 of those combined. Like Nerlens Noel averages about 5 combined steals and blocks per game per 36 minutes, and Muhammad can't even get to 2, including assists. It is just a ridiculously low number. But what he is, and I'll focus on a positive, he's one of the best offensive rebounding wings in the game. He's super aggressive at that end, and if he's forced into big minutes and your league counts offensive rebounds, you're going to get scoring, you're going to get high efficiency, and you're going to get 3, maybe 4 offensive rebounds. And that might not sound like a lot, but that's Andre Drummond type quality, and wings just don't get that, and he can easily get you 3 or 4 a night on a good night, and that's really valuable if you can that number. But as you mentioned, his defensive issue is going to be a real concern, and it's probably going to keep him out of rotation on some nights. Now, Tyus Jones was the Summer League MVP. He's going to be behind Chris Dunn now. I reckon other teams should be trying to pry him away from Minnesota, because I think that he can actually be a really serviceable backup, but he doesn't have much of a pathway to minutes at the moment, does he?
We're talking about Tyus?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be difficult for him to find playing time. That's for sure. Yeah, unless there's, but you do have an injury history with Ricky Rubio, and even though they weren't, he doesn't get nicked up that often. They were major injuries, the ACL and then the ankle injury last 2 years ago. But yeah, if unless Dunn or Rubio gets hurt, I have a hard time finding minutes for Tyus Jones if it's not mop up duty.
Who do you think's the best candidate on this team to be a breakout performer? And you can use whatever criteria you want for a breakout performer.
Well, I would go back to Zach LaVine, because if he does get those minutes, and like we talked about, if he can figure little things out. I mean, he's not going to become an all-world defender in just one training camp or in one season under Tibbs, but if he can show some progress there, and we talked about kind of he brings so much offensively to that spot where maybe Chris Dunn doesn't yet. I think he's going to get big minutes, and I think not playing the point guard is going to free him up like he did at the end of the last season. And I think he's going to put up big numbers. I think really the Wolves fantasy wise, like we talked about, the minutes are going to be there, which means the numbers are going to be there. So I think guys like Rubio are going to put up good numbers. And we mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns and Wiggins and Levine, and even Gorgie Jang. So I think you could take your pick. I think Towns is also going to have a big season. I love the way his mindset is too. He just seems to be a lot wiser than his. Let's see, is he 20 or 21 at this point?
He's
Um,
20.
he's just wise beyond his years, and I think he's already figured this game out quicker than a lot of other guys have. So I would go Zach LaVine one, and then I think Karl-Anthony Towns might be my second pick for a big campaign. Then probably him and Andrew Wiggins right there.
This team has legitimately a chance to have 5 top 50 fantasy players. All the starting 5.
Yeah.
Levine's probably the one who might not get the top 50. The others are almost a guarantee to be top 50 players. Rubio, Towns, Wiggins, and Jeng. So that's almost unheard of to have 5 guys in the top 50. That's why they're going to be so fun to watch. That's why fantasy owners are going to be all over the Timberwolves, because they're fun. They got a real sort of solid 5 guys. These are the best 5 players. And they all fit well together. Dunn's going to be exciting for them as well as the 6th guy in that group. But they got just 5 guys who are like, okay, here are our best players. Let's play them together and let's just see what they can do. And they fit roles well, right. And it's going to be really, really exciting to see what this team can do, especially now that they've got one of the best coaches in the NBA holding the clipboard for them. Alan, what's a bold prediction that you've got for this team?
Well, I would say my bold prediction, the Timberwolves haven't made the playoffs since 2004. I'm going to say that they are going to reach the postseason and snap the string of, let's see, I don't even know what it is now, 12 straight years, 13 straight years of not making the playoffs. I think they can make the jump from to 41, 42, and I think 42 probably gets you in, maybe 41, maybe 40. The West, that's always the saying here is, oh, the West is so tough. Well, tough at the top, but I think towards those 7, 8, 9 seeds, I think the Wolves can be right in there. I don't know how bold a prediction it is, but I think they make the postseason. I think it's time. It may be a little premature to kind of put that out there with Tibbs still coming in for his first year, but I mean his numbers, Josh, just speak for themselves. His time in Chicago, his time in Boston. I mean, it's just the guy is a defensive whiz. Bulls have their franchise has never had a top 5 ranked defense, and Tibbs seems to be able to do it year in and year out. He did it 4 times in 5 years with the Bulls. So I'm not saying they're going to be a top 5 defense, but even a top 10. But the last 2 years they've been 27th and 30th, and you just can't compete. You can't compete when your defense is that poor. And I think that he addresses that big issue right there on the defensive end of the floor. I think he can get them into the top 15, maybe top 10. And I think the other thing that Tibbs realized, and he talked about it a lot in the offseason, the 3-point differential. Years have been 2 of the worst 3-point differential seasons in NBA history. 2 of the worst 6. They got outscored by 3.5 made threes a game last year, 3.6 the year before. So you're playing it from a deficit of 11, 12 points just to start a game, essentially. And that's been too much to overcome. I think he's going to reallocate some of those mid-range shots to 3-point shots, and I think that's going to obviously help the offense a little bit. And I think he's a cohesive 5 and unit that he can go to. I just think it's time for the Wolves to take that next step. And even though these guys are young, even though Towns is only in the 2nd year, Wiggins in his 3rd, I think these guys are wise beyond the years, and I think they can. I think they can break the streak and get to the postseason for the first time since 2004.
Yeah, I can totally see that happening. And you mentioned the strength of the conference. The East and the West almost mirror each other. They've got a couple of strong teams right at the top. Look, one really strong team, the Warriors and the Cavs. Then you've got a couple of next one, the Clippers and the Spurs, and you've got the Raptors and the Celtics. And then you've just got 9 teams who you could find fitting in any sort of order. You could have the Thunder, you could have the Jazz could jump up, the Grizzlies, the Rockets, the Mavericks, the Wolves. All of these teams, they're all, where are they going to finish? Could they finish 4th? Yep. Could they finish 10th? Yes. And could there be 3 games between 4th and 10th? Yes. All this stuff could easily happen. So it's going to be a really, and people say, the season, who cares? The Warriors are going to win. That's great. But every other team apart from the Warriors and to a lesser degree the Cavs, it's going to be really fun to see how it all plays out, to see how these young cores, especially Minnesota, really plays together and becomes a challenger to these teams in the next 2 to 3 years, because you could be seeing the start of something pretty special start to unfold up in Minnesota, and you're going to have the best seats in the house for it, Alan. So I'm sure you look forward to the season. So check it out, everybody. Watch the Timberwolves. Listen to Alan on the radio broadcast, and of course listen to him on the Locked On Wolves podcast. Alan, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today.
Josh, I appreciate it. All the best to you down under, and we'll look forward to that NBA game, Timberwolves game coming soon.
Yeah, well, because of what I do, my work in terms of doing all the fantasy stuff, I have to be sort of at home when the games are on, but I can come across for the NBA finals. So when the Timberwolves are in the finals,
all right, there we go.
You'll see me there. I'll come across.
I'll save you a seat.
Sounds good. That's the best seat in the house. I look forward to it. Alan, where can everyone find you on Twitter before we go?
At Wolves Radio is where I spend most of my time. At Wolves Radio on Twitter.
Okay, so check out Alan there. Follow me at redrock_bball. That's pretty simple to find. I'm sure you will follow me there. But if you don't, check it out. Give both of our podcasts a rating and a review on iTunes. It helps out tremendously, and I do appreciate everyone who has done that. Alan, again, thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.